Hello, my name is Elizabeth Delgado. I am a fourth year at UCLA and an undergraduate researcher for the Project Strike 2 summer research program at Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science. As an undergraduate researcher, my time in this program has allowed me to advocate for my community through an important and introspective collaborative. My project, an analysis of lead-contaminated soil in 3 housing projects, was a continuation of the Better Watts initiative led by Mr. Timothy Watkins, with a focus on the prevalence of lead in the Watts neighborhood. A brief overview. The CDC reports that lead serves no useful purpose in the body. Lead is a toxin that enters the body through inhalation and/or ingestion, which can lead to developmental delays and behavioral abnormalities. Once it enters the body, it is stored in the skeletal system where it can accumulate over time. The half-life of lead in blood is approximately 28 days, while the half-life of lead in the bones and teeth can range anywhere from 28 to 30 years, an exorbitant amount of time. Thankfully, federal and state-level mandates for lead regulations have decreased the number of lead poisoning cases across the United States. However, the Watts neighborhood, which services one of the youngest and poorest demographics in the Los Angeles County, continues to be disproportionately affected due to a lack of adequate policy oversight. An environmental assessment conducted by Andersen Environmental in 2009 for the Jordan Downs Redevelopment Project by the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles, or the HACLA, showed high levels of contaminated soil, which required 33,600 cubic yards of soil to be removed. This remediation improved the general condition for this site enough to conclude that no further analysis at the Jordan Downs site was necessary. However, the remaining 80 acres of this housing project still requires to be fully tested and remediated. The objective of this study was therefore to report and analyze the amount of lead from 149 bare surface soil samples collected in 2016 from 3 housing projects: Imperial Courts, Jordan Downs, and Nickerson Garden, using a handheld X-ray fluorescent or XRF spectrometer. We believe that further testing would expose large amounts of lead-contaminated soil in need of immediate cleanup. Moving on to Figure 1 shows the lead level amounts in the soil samples collected from the Jordan Downs housing project. 89 samples were collected from varied locations. The average for this data set was approximately 97 milligrams of lead per kilogram of soil, and this is represented by the green line in the graph as shown above. The red line represents the California Human Health Screening Level Standard for lead in residential soil, which is 80 milligrams per kilogram. Here in Figure 2, we have the data from the Nickerson Gardens housing project, where 32 soil samples were collected. The average in this data set, still represented by the green line, is approximately 327 milligrams of lead per kilogram of soil. The CHHSL standard is still represented by the red line as seen below. 28 samples were collected from the Imperial Courts housing project as exhibited in Figure 3. The average in this set being 338 milligrams of lead per kilogram of soil, and the CHHSL standard for lead in residential properties remaining at 80 milligrams per kilogram. We have found that the average lead levels for all 3 housing projects surpass the CHHSL's standard of 80 milligrams per kilogram for residential properties. Using these measurements, the percentage amount of soil samples, as shown in Figure 4, above the standard for the Nickerson Gardens housing site was at 96.87%. The Imperial Court site at 92.90%, and in Jordan Downs, this was at 51.70%, meaning that at least 1 out of every 2 samples were not fit for residential use. Therefore, the data for the 3 housing projects show that the soil samples were not in compliance with the residential soil standard. These residents who live in these areas are at an increased risk for lead poisoning and or other health-related adverse effects, which are often difficult to detect as signs and symptoms usually do not appear until dangerous amounts of lead have been ingested. Unless immediate cleanups enacted by policy-driven changes occur, these residents will continue to be in danger from excess lead exposure. This data also calls into question the environmental site assessment done by the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles in the Jordan Downs site, which concluded that no further testing was required for the rest of the 80-acre housing project. Further testing on the entirety of the grounds in all 3 housing projects is needed to fully understand the extent of the soil contamination in order to determine the type of remediation or action needed to eliminate this health hazard. The high standard deviation in this data set could be due to the high volume of residential traffic that could have displaced the soil, causing the varying amounts of lead levels in the samples collected. In future projects, it would be beneficial to collect samples from undisturbed areas with minimal to no residential traffic. Finally, the issue of lead is a civic responsibility that almost never gets addressed until it is too late. This is a problem with long-term effects and life-threatening repercussions. This marks the end of my poster presentation, and thank you very much for your time.